Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justonemorefix. If you like us, head over to iTunes or to Google Play and give us a rating and a comment. In this episode, we're going to talk about building political games and specifically vampire games. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix. Welcome to Just One More Fix. So as you heard, we are going to talk about building political games, kind of focusing on World of Darkness, and specifically Vampire the Masquerade. I had seen several posts on some forums that I frequent talking about how there were people that were looking to get into running Vampire the Masquerade games, and they were coming from either a Pathfinder or a D&D 5e kind of a background, and they weren't sure how to set up a game, how to build the games for Vampire, because there were no real adventures for it. So I thought we might take some time to kind of talk about how we lay out our games and that kind of stuff, and just some things that we have found that work for us and our table, and to maybe break down some of those entry barriers, because Vampire is kind of an intimidating game to start off with. It's very big. There's a whole lot to it. There's so many books. It's kind of obscene, really. And there's a giant meta plot. So the first thing I'm going to say right out the bat is to just leave the meta plot at home. Not involve it unless your players are already invested in it and they already know it, or if you know it very well. If you're brand new to it, don't worry about the meta plot. It's not going to change a whole lot. You focus on the setting and what Vampire is about, and you can incorporate those little bits of meta plot as the game goes along. If the players like them, then you can draw more of them in there. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would also add, kind of in the meta plot vein, I guess, there are a host of people that make really interesting bad guys for your PCs in this game. But there is no need for you to involve all of them if you're not comfortable with the system yet. There is plenty to do if you do nothing but cam and humans, Camarilla and humans. You don't even need to involve anything else until you have a solid grasp of that. There is plenty there to keep everyone busy. So werewolves may be intriguing. Maybe you want to incorporate some fae. Maybe you want to get involved with some ghosts and some, what's the clan that does the ghost? Giovanni, thank you. Or Sabat or Bali. The list goes on and on and on. 8 million
other things.
But please just start with Camarilla and humans. Right. That's all you need.
Keep it simple, because really the things that emphasize the focus of your classic vampire games are really just based straight in the Camarilla. And that's the foundation of all of it. And if you can kind of build that with your players and that I don't know, basic understanding of how the world works in the World of Darkness and Vampire, then that will take care of everything for you for the future once you build that good foundation and you introduce some of the more nuanced or tricky pieces as the games go along, I guess.
Right.
So that being said, before we really dive into what, I guess we'll just kind of talk about what we're actually going to do. We're going to kind of lay out a basic city as to how we would plot it out to build a vampire game. So together between me and Lacey, we're just going to sit here and brainstorm and build a basic city for what we're going to do.
I think just before that, though, we need to talk about why maybe people have such a hard time running this game, because it is not D&D, because D&D is very political, social, shallow.
Yes.
And this is a whole new kind of depth for that. So you kind of... It's not to say that everything you used in D&D is going to be completely useless, because it's not. There's still, taking what the players give you, thinking on your feet, incorporating those into what you're doing. And there's still the aspect of giving them something shiny to chase, especially if they're new players in the system. You still have to dangle something for them to do to get them pulled into the world. So those skills are still going to be relevant, but you need to start thinking about things in an entirely different way. You need to move beyond purely physical challenges for your characters and start thinking about how you're going to challenge them mentally and emotionally as characters. And maybe as people too.
There you go. Right on. So with all that, we're going to talk about some basic inspiration places that we have found for inspiration that are, some of them are directly related to Vampire or vampires, and some of them are directly related to Vampire the Masquerade. Others are sources that you may not have traditionally thought of in terms of vampire world. So
I'm going to talk about my absolute favorite one first. So I have a deep love for the Anne Rice Vampire Chronicles. And Lestat, to me, is just a beautiful example of a social vampire, very much different than the Nosferatu movie sort of vampire. And if you are not a big reader, I mean, there are several books here. My favorite is The Vampire Lestat. I would go with that one. There's also the older movie adaptation, Interview with the Vampire. And Brad Pitt does a phenomenal job of playing Louis, who very much incorporates the human versus monster battle that is accentuated so much in the Vampire the Masquerade system.
And we're going to reference some of the things that happen in some of these inspirational movies and literature and stuff as how they reinforce themes in vampire, I guess.
And that movie also incorporates the idea of the cam in having to stay hidden so that you're not destroyed by the human world. Mm-hmm. That's very much present there as well. And your classic vampires being destroyed by fire and sunlight and some of the powers that you see, you can also see in the movie as well.
Right. All right, so the next one is kind of a classic that everybody is vaguely familiar with at some level, whether you've read the books or watched the show on HBO, and that is Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire. Now, obviously there's no vampires in it, but there is a huge amount of politics in that movie and
in that story
show
line.
And the whole thing.
That world.
Yeah, so it's a perfect example of how things get done without stabbing everybody, essentially, right?
Sometimes with stabbing.
Right, everybody. There's some, but but a lot
political
of it
maneuvering.
Is political maneuvering and blackmail, extortion.
Stabbing the right people at the right times without getting caught.
Right. But most of what happens is through politics and influence. So like characters like Varys is a great example of a Nosferatu kind of a character that lurks in the background, knows all kinds of information, and sells that information to get what he wants done. So if you look at those individual characters and how they go about doing things.
Lord Baelish.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even Cersei does a really good job of, wielding power in a brutal kind of a way.
She's a Malkavian for sure.
I could go venture as well.
No doubt.
Right. So... but there are so many sources of inspiration in that show that we could just go on and on for an entire episode just about that. So that's a very strong one, and everybody knows it, and it's very relatable. So when you're trying to explain things to your players, maybe you can draw on that to reference, this is kind of like, this clan is kind of like how Varys is. The Nosferatus are similar to that in that they draw influence and try and stay in the shadows and don't directly get involved in a lot of things, that kind of stuff.
So if high fantasy is not your cup of tea, there are some other excellent shows that you can check out that have similar nuanced political maneuvering. House of Cards.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of House of Cards and Frank Underwood. I mean, I realize it's a story. It's it's written, but like the political maneuvering that he does is truly devious and no holds barred and anything to get to where his goal is and what he wants to do. So he is a perfect example of doing whatever it takes to get what you need. And while there is some murder and killing in that show, most of it is not done that way. And he's a perfect example of a group of people, working through politics and influence to get what they want.
He's also a good example of the stress you see that builds up when you start doing those small little inhuman things.
Right.
So you really see him evolve over the seasons into this sort of warped version of what was going on before.
Right.
The Borgias is another good example, more historical fiction in nature there. So if you're looking at more of a Dark Ages Masquerade game, you might want to check out there because they have the interesting religious pull as well, and how the social dynamic is there between the political system and the religious system.
Oh, yeah. But it's all still totally relevant to the modern time, too, because they are just doing things through political influence, bribery, extortion, blackmail. That's really, what it's all about, essentially. What else do you have on the list?
True Blood.
Oh, I forgot about True Blood.
So it's a little bit more, I don't know if I would say a little less serious. The political maneuvering is still there, but not to the same epic level as some of the other ones we just mentioned. The reason why I like this one for Masquerade, you'll notice in the True Blood setting that everybody knows that there's vampires now. So they don't really have that part going on, but they do highlight the, what do I want to say, the hierarchy the
Right.
hierarchy of vampire society. So in that show, you have Eric as the sheriff, and you have him answering to a council of elders. You have very much the elder versus neonate setup. And then you also have, again, that human versus monster struggle. And you see a lot of times where they lose.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very real possibility in Masquerade when you're talking about controlling the beast.
Are there any more?
I think, we did write down just a couple of games. So if you're a electronic gamer, I guess you want to say,
Right.
there is an app for the phone, tablet, what have you, called We Eat Blood and All Our Friends Are Dead. And it is actually put out by the Vampire the Masquerade folks. Right. And you get basically ominous text messages from various individuals, right. And you try not to die.
Now, that one is more theme-based for inspiration. It doesn't go into a lot of the political maneuvering or the world of vampire. It's kind of an introduction to some of the ideas. But it does a good job of focusing on the themes and the darkness that exists in the world of darkness. And while it may not give you any plot hook ideas right out the gate or whatever in terms of how to build your games, but it does give you an idea for theme and feel.
And then the last one we have written down is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, which is a PC RPG game.
Right.
Right. And it's, again, put out by the Vampire the Masquerade people. So you're looking at, you're looking at the actual very much feel of the game.
Now, that game starts off in the Dark Ages, and if you continue to play it, it will take you all the way up through modern times. And it's a fun game. I played through it. It's an older game, though, but it still holds up relatively well in terms of story and whatever. So, alrighty. So I guess we're just going to jump right into this. I'm going to lay out a couple kind of ground rules for how I would lay things out. Not to say that it's the only way, because as long as you're having fun, I think you're doing it right. But I think that there are some ways to set yourself up to succeed. So some things to do is to, one, tell everybody that's going to make a character that it has to be a Camarilla character. They have to be loyal to the Camarilla. Doesn't mean they can't be a snake. Doesn't mean they can't be betraying and nasty and terrible people.
Okay.
But they have to be loyal to the Camarilla.
Stop you right there. So do you prefer then to have all of your PCs start off as vampires then, or as mortals?
I think in the first game you have them go ahead and start off as neonates. If you're not familiar with the world of darkness and you haven't ran a vampire game, I think running through a period of being a ghoul or your embrace might be a little bit difficult to work out to make it seem impactful. So I think I would just go ahead and start off having everybody make up a vampire who's been around for between 5 and 50 years, we'll say. So okay. The other thing is, like I said, they all need to be loyal to the Camarilla. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't betray other characters and NPCs and all that kind of stuff, because that's part of the political game, right? But they need to be loyal to the Camarilla.
I know we've done a vampire review where we've talked a little bit about the system and everything, but just in case they haven't listened to this and they're really completely unfamiliar, can you give me just like a 10-second synopsis of what the Camarilla is? So
the Camarilla is a society of vampires that believes in the Masquerade, and that was where I was going to go next. So they have several traditions that are the laws that they abide by. And they have a political structure that is based in city-states. So a prince has his domain, which is a city, and he has ultimate say over anything that happens in the city, provided it doesn't break any of the real serious traditions, such as Masquerade and all these other kind of things. So it's still kind of a feudal system, essentially, in a lot of ways. I mean, there is a Primogen council in a lot of cities. It doesn't have to be, and their role might change from city to city, so that's something that you can decide, and we'll get more into that as we go along. But that's essentially it. It's just a large political faction, and it's run by terrible people, essentially, So, all right, right on. So the other thing is, we mentioned Masquerade. Now, the Masquerade is the first tradition, and it is that you cannot let mortals know that you are a vampire and that supernatural is real, essentially. So you can do what you want, but it's kind of that don't get caught thing. So you can't display huge powers that would be reality breaking and anything along those lines. So you can be on camera and be in front of people, and that's okay, so long as it doesn't break the Masquerade. And if you want to know more about the Masquerade, you can look it up in the book. I don't want to spend all day all night talking about that, but it is very important. And I would make sure that you impress that on your players to make them know that the Masquerade is very serious and they will be punished harshly for breaking it. And that's one of the ways that you can prevent them from kind of running amok and just doing nonsense if they're new vampire players that might get bored and just want to go trash the city because I have these cool super vampire powers.
Right.
So Okay, so the other thing is that if they do run amok, remember, there are always bigger fish. If you're having characters make neonates, which is between 5 and 50 years, there are vampires that have been around for hundreds and a few that have been around for thousands of years that are still awake.
And this is another way that this game deviates very much from your D&D system.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're making challenges for your D&D characters, you're looking at what level they are, and you want to put them against something that is on par with them to combat based on what levels your characters are, so that you're not, overreaching and just having a total party kill, but you still want them to struggle a little bit. With this, you are purposely making NPCs that are significantly more powerful. And you can have a mix. They don't all have to be like that.
Right.
But you're definitely going to have some heavy hitters that they don't have a prayer of overcoming, especially single-handedly.
Right. That's the other thing that's fun about it is that, one, you have to learn the balance that is of not using those uber powerful characters in the city to just crush them and leave them hopeless. I feel like they work better as the ominous threat that where you're going, you're going to cross this guy and then bad things are going to happen, one of those kind of things. And it's just like Alfred Hitchcock says, it's scarier when you don't see the monster. So when you haven't seen the things that a person can do to you, they are much scarier until, does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I guess we'll start to build our city here, I guess. So the first thing is I think that you should lay out your city before your characters are made, so that you can kind of give them an idea of what you've built, and they can build their characters off of that and incorporate some of their goals that they want to have into their character creation, because character goals in this, which we'll go into in a little bit, are very, very important for this kind of a game, okay? So the first thing is we have to decide where the game is going to be. So I always say that cities that make the game more visceral and more real. And when you take over territories and have wins in the mortal world and take over locations, it makes it more real and tangible to you. So I always recommend picking a city that is close to you, or a city that everyone knows.
Let's be honest, it's just easier too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, your players are visualizing the same thing that you are, because everybody has been there and knows what's there.
So you don't have to set it, if you live in Kansas, you don't need to set it in New York City, unless everybody that's in the game is pretty familiar with New York City. You can set it wherever you want, just some city of a decent size, because every city has their secrets and their corruption and their darkness. It's real easy to draw it in, especially if people know it, right? Because they know those creepy places, they know those urban legends that are only local to your place, right? So I would just pick any city that is close to you and set it there, so long as it's a decent sized city of, I don't know, at least 30, 50,000 people or so, Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, right on.
Yeah, I'm on board.
So after you pick your city and where it's located, we'll talk about locations and stuff, because you just need to make a list of important locations that everyone knows. So City Hall, the mall, if there's a college there, large places of business.
And World of Darkness is considered to be modern day.
Mm-hmm.
There are some adaptations for different eras, but you're basically talking about the now. Now you can slide it a little bit back if you don't want to have to be worried about cell phones or things like that. But really, I think just here and now is the best way to go.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So after that, the two things that I will always keep coming back to are theme and mood. And those are the two pillars that I build my games on, right? So everything that I put in the game, that I put in there, I have them in there to try and reinforce the themes and mood that I'm going for, okay? So as far as mood, it's a horror game, right? So we're going to pick, obviously, horror. It's going to be dark.
When you're talking about the horror theme, I also think about things that are limited. So I like this idea from A Quiet Year, and you're familiar with the cities we're talking about. We've already established that. So think about what is lacking in your area, and then dial it up several notches to a World of Darkness level.
Right.
Whatever it is, if maybe heroin is a huge thing where you're at. I mean, it is everywhere. So now dial that up significantly. So now you're having that issue. You're having police. You've got the whole drug community that gives them sources to draw on, and you've also, and to a certain extent, tainted the food supply,
right,
which can be another concern that you're going to draw on. So whatever it is, pick a couple things that are going to be struggle for both the people and the players.
Right. So we didn't really mention this before. We probably should have at the beginning, as we talk about heroin use and drug abuse and police and all this kind of stuff. There's some pretty dark themes that can exist in World of Darkness. and make sure you know your players and what they're comfortable with, and make sure that everyone at the table knows that if there is something that is they don't like, can't handle, for whatever reason, no matter what it is, how big a deal or how small a deal everyone else at the table thinks it is, that it's okay to back off from that, and no harm, no foul, and we'll alter the game so that everybody's comfortable at the table playing, because you don't want to shrink your table size, one, plus it's just kind of a crappy thing to do to someone. So just keep in mind if there's anything in the past they've had trouble with in games or anything, and let everybody know at the table that it's okay and it's not a big deal if there's something that goes over the line, whatever that is.
I just thought about our biggest inspiration oversight that I think we've had in a long time. The perfect example of an actual World of Darkness world, nothing to do with vampire or politics, is The Crow.
Oh.
That city is World of Darkness.
Yeah,
that is Bad City dialed up by about 100.
Yeah, exactly. Watch The Crow. If you haven't seen it, shame on you. Watch The Crow.
That is the city mood.
Exactly. So it's dark. I like to have this idea that everything is kind of perpetually wet. Like if you think of The Crow, it's always raining or just stopped raining. Everything has this kind of wet
sheen
puddles
to it,
everywhere.
Dirty sheen.
Exactly. Dirty is a big one. It's a dirty, corrupt.
Yeah, drugs, violence.
Mm-hmm. Anything, just even at the top level of things are just, it's, I like to use run down or dilapidated. The city is in decay because there's vampires there. Everything is in decay. They're stagnant, right? So those are our moods. So we're going to write down here, I have horror, obviously, but we're going to write decay. What else? Some things that we have lacking in this city. What do we want to have lacking in this city?
Social services. No, sunshine. I don't know. I mean, I kind of already talked about the resource scarcity when you're talking about clean blood or whatever.
Okay, so we'll write.
I don't know if you consider that a lack of cleanness or a surplus of contamination.
Right,
but
right. So feeding grounds, uncontaminated feeding grounds. We'll write that down. Okay.
So feeding grounds are designated by clan.
Usually,
and they're where a vampire can go to feed.
And then we'll put another scarcity. We'll put, how about just work in general for the city? It's a run-down city, and maybe in the Rust Belt somewhere.
Employment is a big
and
problem.
so that creates a lot of problems for the city. So we're just going to write down work. Okay. Now, after that, we have themes. And this is kind of, if you think of your mood, that's the whole setting, right? What is happening in the entire world and how it feels. Now, themes are what your game is going to be about, okay? So there's a few of them that I always draw back on, and Sins of the Father is a really good, easy one to fall back on, because if you're neonates, your sire is the person who made you. He has enemies and friends, and it's always fun to have to deal with the problems and mistakes that he made and the people that he betrayed, even though you had nothing to do with it, because you're tied to him in lineage. His sins are your sins, and you're caught up in it. Even if he's dead, doesn't even exist anymore, that's a strong possibility, right? Another one that I like to draw on is that nothing is free. And this is very true in the vampire world. No matter how small it is, everything has a cost. If it seems like it's free, the cost is probably double, right? So think of that in terms of when players are asked for favors for somebody. Can you do this for me? Oh, yeah, sure. But it's going to come back to haunt them, and that they're going to have to repay that favor no matter how small it was. And it's always fun when they ask someone who is more influential than them for a favor. Then when that favor comes back around, when the influential person asks you to do something that might be more than is fair, what are you going to do? Do you turn them down or not? And that is where the fun lies in Vampire, I think. Right there is those kind of decisions. So other ones I have down here is that death is not the worst punishment, and that's a theme that I think you should have throughout the entire game. And the best example of this to see in a movie, I think, is in Interview with the Vampire, when Louis gets bricked up in the wall in a coffin upside down, and he's left there to rot, presumably forever, right? And then Armand breaks him out of the wall, right? And that's horrible, right? And he wasn't going to be killed. They were just going to leave him in there.
That's after having the person he loves the most burned to death by the sun.
Yeah.
Which he gets to watch.
So there's things like that are very, I don't know if emotional is the right word, but very powerful, right? And making them know that I'm not going to kill your character. I'm going to make him suffer, and I'm going to enjoy it. Whoever it is that's doing this to them. So that's a very big one. And those are the three ones that I kind of come back to quite a bit over and over that I draw from, I guess. Now the next thing we do is we lay out our city. And so we're just going to, the way I do this is I fill the main city positions with vampires. Because if the players are going to be neonates, they're probably not going to be vampires, right? So basing on the 6 cam clans, if you want to include Gangrel in it, you can or not, but that's some more meta plot minutia if you want to get into it or not. But so we just pick a prince, and we're going to say, what, a Ventrue Prince?
Seems appropriate.
That works. He's an easy... Ventrue Princes are easy bad guys, right? So if you look at the one-page rundown of what the Ventrue are, they're your classic feudal lord kind of things, right? So... And we're not going to put names or anything. We're just going to stick with themes so you can make them personality-wise whoever you want, okay?
Oh, I like making names.
Yeah. All right, so our Seneschal, we're going to make, what do you say, Toreador?
I was actually just thinking that.
Okay, right on. So now we have our Prince and our Seneschal, and we are going to start to establish relationships between these people, right? So if our Ventrue, he is the most powerful. He's the Prince of the city, so... I think if he has a Toreador Seneschal, maybe that's a rival that he put in power to keep a better eye on them, right? Does that make sense?
Yep.
So we're going to put that these two are rivals, and that immediately sets 2 clans at odds with each other. So if you have any characters that make Ventrue or Toreador, they're automatically drawn into this at some level, right? So maybe their 2 characters are friends, but when things start to shake out and favors are asked of them from different important people in the city, how do they react to that? What do they do? And that begins to build our framework for how this all works, right? Now we have a sheriff. So the sheriff is, Prince obviously is the king of the city, right? Seneschal is his second in command, kind of takes care of a lot of the day-to-day stuff or whatever, but is essentially the prince when he's not around. The sheriff is the investigator and not quite the enforcer, but sometimes is the enforcer of the city. So what do you think?
I feel like Nosferatu.
Alrighty. Nosferatu. All right, so...
Now, some of these were shaking out based on what certain clans are good at and what they're known for. So your Ventrue are sort of like your savvy businessmen of clans and kind of the hard asses too. Your Toreador are sort of your beautiful, conniving, social grace clan.
Artsy, yeah.
Your Nosferatu are hidden in the shadows and also physically powerful.
All right, so next is Scourge on our list, and this is the enforcer of the Prince's justice, essentially. So I'm going to say...
I always love a Gangrel for this. Right, I know you said maybe no Gangrel, but I really like Clan Gangrel.
Well, they're the easiest ones. They can do ag right away.
Yeah,
but
so they have a pretty bad power for making that happen.
Right.
But they're also kind of the loners of the group, and it's not really necessary for your Scourge to be out rubbing elbows with people. In fact, a lot of times the other people of the city don't even know who that person is.
So just to stick without Gangrel in here, I'm going to go with Bruja. Yeah.
Don't you do it.
So I'm going to make a Bruja sheriff. So Bruja they have celerity and potence, and which is super strength and super speed, as well as presence, which is the ability to enamor people socially. So that's who I have here in Scourge. And I think in order to do this easily, there's 6 cam clans. We have 6 positions here in front of us, and I think we should have one in each category.
I think Tremors make a good harpy.
Okay.
They are kind of bookish anyway, but not in a socially awkward way necessarily. So your harpy is the one that keeps track of favors owed to who, and it's a very powerful position, and Tremere are all about grabbing that power.
Right, exactly. And the final one would be Malkavian being the keeper of Elysium. They're the ones that make sure that the Elysiums are running properly, that everything is taken care of there, the refreshments if needed are provided there, and that peace is kept in Elysium. And they can do this with help of the other agents of the city as well.
Now, Malkavians are a little bit crazy, but they're also very sneaky, and they're very good at finding out things that you may not want them to find out.
Now, I will say this, a quick aside here for Malkavians. If you have any PCs that want to make Malkavians and haven't made them before, the insanity that comes along with a Malkavian is a big part of the character, but make sure that when they define their character, it isn't just what my insanity is. Make sure that they are a character with an insanity, not an insanity with some dots on the page. Does that difference make sense? Do you think that clarifies it enough?
Yeah, and I think for me, that's always the big incentive about having people make mortals first, is that you're not considering what powers you have. You're thinking about character first, and then you get to add that other layer on top of it. So, I mean, if you have noobs, I may just give them a blurb about what each clan is about and not even tell them what cool things they get to do until they make the character.
Right.
But if you have some experienced players, just encourage them to think more about personal character depth.
All right, so after that, we have the Primogen, and the Primogen are the head of each clan. And usually when I build a city, I don't think about the Primogen too much because I let the character, I let the players make their characters, and then I make the primogen as a reaction to what their character is, so that maybe I can build friction into the relationship between their character and the primogen. Does that?
Do you feel like it's necessary to make primogen of the other clans that the characters are not playing?
Sometimes, yes. I might just have them in the background and I can change their personality as needed. They're kind of like a trump card should I need them, but I don't have to fully flesh them out. Now, the primogen of the clans that are being played by characters do need to be made so that they have some kind of a personality, a name with them, things that they're doing and involved in or whatever, right?
I would add that if you're making a primogen for the clan, I think it would be helpful to give that primogen specific goals that they want to accomplish in the city.
Well, that's something that we'll talk about, that I generally do. The more integral to the game a NPC is, the more flushed out their goals are, and when I run the games, because the players interact with them more, right?
Right. And as far as interacting with officials go, your neonate is not going to be interacting with the prince regularly. Probably not the seneschal either. Mm-hmm. They may have some play with the harpy, possibly the keeper, and that's probably going to be about it.
Right.
But your primogen is the leader of their clan, and they're probably going to have more interaction with that person than they would with some of the other higher officials of the city.
Exactly. All right. So those are our main stations of the city, and we'll kind of come back to them here in a minute. So the next thing we need to kind of figure out is other elements of the World of Darkness, whether we want to incorporate them. So I know Lacey mentioned to not involve the other supernaturals right away, which I agree with, but one easy thing to do to keep players in the city and make sure that they're not just going to run, tuck tail, and run away is that you say that outside the city is controlled by werewolf territory. The outside the city is werewolf territory. If you go out there, there's a good chance you're going to be attacked by werewolves, and werewolves are machines of death. That's what they do. So,
and that's not a stretch in the World of Darkness either. It's assumed that wild, unoccupied areas are inhabited by other creatures, be they werewolves, be they ghosts, or wraiths, or fae. There are lots of boogeymen in the darkness in this system.
So what that will do is it will provide a way for you to always have this looming threat outside the city that kind of keeps them there. They don't want to leave. If you leave, it's too dangerous, all this kind of stuff, right? So I have anarchs, which are anarchs are people that kind of believe in the Masquerade, but they may not necessarily be loyal to the Camarilla. They're more forward-thinking, less about a prince, and more about democracy and that kind of motivation, although it's a little more complicated. So I generally wouldn't involve them if you're not familiar with the differences between the Cam and the Anarchs. I just think it's something that might cloud things up. But Sabbat is always an easy one to incorporate. If you want monsters, and that's the way I would treat them in a new game to introduce someone to the Sabbat, is that they are just bloodthirsty heathen monsters that just view mortals as juice bags or juice boxes or, meat sacks. And that's what they are. Don't give them personalities. Don't make them, lovable, friendly Sabbat people. Make them literally monsters. Incorporate them as much as you want. If you need a boogeyman or a bad guy that is kind of knowable, they're a good tool to use. You can use the same powers that are in the book there, as much or as little as you want, but they are the faceless bad guy who is just a wicked and evil in ways more than any other vampire, I guess, right?
What about hunters?
You can involve them as at the same way. Similar, I guess. They kind of come about things in a different way. But I think the hunter world is... I think I would focus more on death by pitchfork, which is the mob of humans, as opposed to the individual hunters, because I think you're getting into running a lot more NPCs that you've got to build for the framework out. I think that's, as you have developed the game a little bit, maybe you introduce a hunter.
But when you're talking about that aspect of the hunter, you're only talking about physical confrontation. Mm-hmm. So when you're setting up a social working against, maybe there's something bigger and insidious working against the Camarilla, what do you use as that bad guy? Is it always mortals? Is it a higher ranking Sabbat, but maybe they just don't know it yet? Is it an independent faction? Is it a hunter?
So
who makes the best big sort of mafioso bad guy?
I actually prefer to use the power structure of the city. So when there's things that are happening in the city that don't seem to have a reason, the prince or the seneschal is behind it. Or maybe there's an independent vampire in town that just has a lot of influence, like a Giovanni or a Setite, right? But it's some vampire because they're the real movers and shakers because they don't die. They're always there. Their power may wax and wane, but they never actually go away. And that's what I like to reinforce, is that these are things that are always being done by the people around you that you know. It's just whether you can prove it or not.
Okay.
So once we have kind of the basic framework for our city laid out. Now what I do is in a big circle, I write all of my city positions. So Prince, Seneschal, Scourge, Sheriff, Harpy, and Keeper. Okay. Now, if you imagine drawing a line from each of them to one another, you don't have to make 8,000 relationships, but you do need to make a couple key ones. Okay. So we established that the Seneschal and the Prince are rivals. Okay. Now we go to the other ones. So who is friends with the Seneschal? Or allies, I suppose. Friends is kind of a strange word to use in the vampire world.
I feel like our sheriff is probably friends with the Seneschal.
Alrighty, so the sheriff and the Seneschal are allies. Okay, so that means that...
So when your talking piece for your government and your enforcer of justice are friends and maybe not friends with you, you could see where that could create some unique difficulties.
Right, or also perhaps the Toreador Seneschal and the Ventrue Prince don't see eye to eye on some things that are being done in the city. Now, since the sheriff is the ally of the Toreador Seneschal, does he really investigate the way he would fully if he truly believed in the prince? Or
perhaps he finds things that aren't really there, depending on how diabolical he wants to be.
So maybe now here's an easy thing to do is just follow this on down. Why is he allied with the Toreador Seneschal? Perhaps he believes that he was slighted by the prince. Maybe in some way he felt. Let's back this up. There are two ways to view positive and negative relationships, right? Specifically negative ones, right? There are things where things really did happen, right? They actually did something to you. And then there's the other way where...
perceived slight.
Yes, the real and imagined slight, right? And that the imagined ones are the most fun because maybe they did something to you. Maybe it was just dumb luck in the way that random events shook out, right? But at the end of the day, they still hate each other. So there's some perceived slight here between the prince and the sheriff. Do you have anything?
Sure. Okay, so the easiest slight is usually with position assignment. So I'm going to say maybe Clan Bruja really actually wanted that Harpy position because they wanted to be in charge of the social influence of our political group here. And so Clan Ventrue promoted Tremere to the position of Harpy instead of Clan Bruja.
Right on.
So now you have the perceived slight by the prince, and you also have tension between Bruja and Tremere because Tremere got the position that Bruja wanted.
Right. So that's the next thing is these are unintended consequences. So maybe they're not outright enemies, but there's always this thing of you got the thing that I wanted and I didn't get it. So now I don't like you.
Right.
Or maybe I'm frustrated and I don't treat you as well as I probably should have. Now, the fun thing to do with some of these things is that we have the sheriff doesn't like the prince because he feels slighted. But what if the prince doesn't even know it and is completely oblivious to it, right?
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. So the prince, he's so high and mighty, he doesn't even realize and thinks, well, he should just be happy he's a sheriff.
He was like, I drew these positions from a hat.
Right. So also we have here that the Harpy and the sheriff, this is a tense relationship here, right?
Yes. But I feel like the Harpy probably has a solid connection with our prince, the Ventrue. Because Clan Tremere always wants the power, and they have the most socially powerful position in the city.
Right. So this is the Harpy is going to be loyal to the prince, maybe even to a fault, right?
Sure.
All right. And then the prince knows this, and he abuses the Harpy. He has him do things that he knows he will go above and beyond to take care of. And this is kind of what's the right word? A one-sided relationship in how they do things. Okay. All right.
This is a dependent,
exactly.
relationship.
All right. So we haven't tied in the keeper.
I also think when you're talking about having the Harpy go above and beyond in some things, that you may see farther encroachment of the Harpy on the sheriff's job. Or possibly even on the Seneschal's job. And then you're going to add even more tension to those relationships.
Right. So there's an easy thing to add in. I think we go towards the Seneschal because we have a lot of things tying into the sheriff here. And this is where you want to kind of make sure that you have this tangled web, because this is what World of Darkness is all about, really, and vampire specifically. So we have our Tremere Harpy, and I know we're throwing around a lot of terms, but it's just to keep things consistent so that you don't get confused with names. I think it's easier to keep track of clan, right? So our Tremere Harpy hates this seneschal, and that's the position that he is really angling for. So any chance he gets, he's going to undermine the seneschal and perhaps try and show the seneschal to be incompetent at best or subversive at worst, right?
Okay. Now, the one person we are kind of leaving out of this is the keeper. So I think with the harpy encroaching on the seneschal and the seneschal in league with the sheriff, the seneschal is also going to try and draw on the keeper as an ally.
Okay.
Against the Ventru and the harpy.
So I think this is an easy trope to play on. We have the keeper being a Malkavian and they're madmen. So maybe, as tradition fits generally with Malkavian, sometimes maybe he's not the most reliable or consistent in how he goes about doing things, which makes the relationship hard when you're trying to manipulate them to do things, right?
Mm-hmm. So I also don't think the keeper is completely on the side of the other group. Mm-hmm. So I think he's going to be more of a neutral party.
Kind of like a third party here doing his own thing, has his own agenda, right? And that's something that you could make up entirely for your game, what he's after, whether that's something in the mortal world that he wants, or whether he wants power in vampire society, or whether he wants to have Malkavians be ascendant and the most influential in general in the city. He could have whatever his own personal agenda is, and maybe that is more important to him than pulling the levers of power.
So or maybe he's pulling the levers of power in his own way. That's another option. As keeper, you can take any slight against the Elysium and turn that into boons in your own favor.
Oh, yeah.
So now everyone owes you social favors that you can pull in at a later date.
Exactly. When the biker Bruja walks in and soils the carpet, that's a huge slight. Oh, my goodness. This is what are they? Those expensive rugs, the Persian rug or whatever, however you want to do it. It's wide open. You can do whatever you want with it. So... And we didn't really tie in the Scourge here, but the Scourge in my mind a lot of times isn't necessarily too much of a political position. I like them better as a thing that the players know can always come after them and is this scary...
And like I said, he may be an unknown person. It may be only the prince and the seneschal that even know who the Scourge is.
Correct. So... All right, so that's pretty much, we have kind of laid out some politics here that's happening, okay? And granted, these are rough ideas, but when you have how the relationships kind of work at a very broad level, right? We kind of explain some of this to the players, and you have them make characters. Now, once they've made a character, if I make a Toreador, right, the easiest thing to do is to suck them up into the political machinations of the Toreador Seneschal. The same happens with all the other characters, right? Now, you might have one person that out of the party that kind of develops as leader, and they're kind of going to steer the game a little more. So then you can use that to kind of steer the story of the game. But Vampire is a game that the story wanders back and forth and the focus shifts back and forth. And you've got to learn to share that spotlight time because every person is going to have their own politics going on. An easy way to do this is to have large gatherings of vampires where everyone can get together and you can move the spotlight from person to person as they go through and talk and try and find out information that they want or whatever needs to be done.
I would really encourage you to tell your players to make a goal for their character, an individual goal unrelated to their clan, or, it could be related to the political leanings of the city, but unique to their character. Have them actually write it down. So that they have something that they're playing towards on their own, and that is going to give you something to draw off of for your plots as well, and gives them something that they're already invested in doing. So if they're kind of stumbling a little bit and not sure what they're supposed to be doing, they're going to draw on that and start working towards that goal until you can get them caught up in something else.
Right on. So something we touched on and didn't really set out yet was location. So we're just going to highlight, I don't know, half a dozen or so locations, okay? So one of the things we mentioned is that there is a problem with finding a source of clean food, clean blood, right? So immediately, let's say that there's only one place in the city that you can get clean blood, and that is going to be controlled by some clan in the city. So who is that controlled by?
I feel like Clan Ventru makes the most sense. Okay. Doesn't the prince set the feeding grounds?
He does, and he could have done it. He could have given it to somebody else as a way to buy them off. Maybe he gave it to Clan Toreador to buy their loyalty so that the Toreador Seneschal would be loyal to him. I'll give you this position. I will give you the best feeding grounds in the city, right? Or maybe he's just a terrible despot and says, well, we're Ventru. We're the best. We get the best feeding grounds. Suck it up. Okay, so that's what we're going to go with this time. So they have the best feeding grounds, which is where?
So are we just talking about like generic city district then?
Yep.
So probably the cleanest feeding grounds are going to be in the, well, you want good feeding too. Let's see, it wouldn't be in a university district. It would not be downtown.
Right.
You don't want it to be too rural because there's not enough people. Let's talk about like possibly like a strip mall sort of area, somewhere where it's always kind of lit and busy, not a lot of dim alleys.
So a nice commercial district.
Yeah, a commercial district, but not like a commercial warehousing district.
Right,
like
okay. Right.
Commercial, what do you want to call it?
With like shopping places and...
Commercial shopping district.
Right. Okay. So there's places to sit down and eat.
Right.
Maybe there's some nice upscale bars and pubs, restaurants even. Nothing quite too nightclubby, but somewhere like where like martini bars and that kind of a thing is what I'm envisioning. Does that sound right? Okay.
Yes.
Right on. So that's our one location there. We've got some kind of a
we'll just call it the upscale business district. How about that?
Commercial district. Okay. Right on. So then obviously every town of any size has some kind of a hospital area or where there's a concentration of medical buildings. That's an easy one to draw from. There's a lot of tropes that go on with horror and hospitals and healthcare. So
some stereotypes seem to exist for a reason. I think maybe just, really well-to-do people don't want to live near the hospital. I don't know, but they tend to be in
terrible areas,
bad neighborhoods.
Exactly. So who controls the hospital area? Who has influence over the health of the city?
I think I'm going to give that to Clan Malkavian too, because he doesn't have a lot going on in our political hierarchy, and being around the hospital is going to be a big factor in city influence, especially in this city we've created with a huge drug problem.
Exactly. It also gives him a lot of ways to be able to maneuver things for anyone politically, whether maybe he's poses as a physician and he's a death investigator or a coroner of some kind.
He's the night shift ER doctor.
Exactly. And so much that can be used in so many ways. And if you have characters that are part of Clan Malkavian, maybe he needs them to go do things and procure things and set things up for what he's going to do. I would just like to say
on a side note, for those of you that don't work in the healthcare field, you have no idea how much power your elected coroner really holds until you start thinking about all the ways they could abuse that power.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen it happen in LARP so many times. We're kind of closely connected to it, so we understand a little better than most, but it is really scary. It's good that most people are doing good work for the most part, I suppose.
Right.
Anyway, so on to other things. So we have a commercial district and a hospital. How about some kind of industrial area? That's a good one to have. Factories or docks even. Industrial.
I would say one more aside about the hospital area. If your neonates do end up getting into a lot of trouble, there is a potential that they will end up at the morgue and owe your Malkavian a very big favor.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. So our industrial district, I'm thinking this is going to be a Bruja area, like Teamsters, that kind of a thing. Organized labor seems to be kind of like a Bruja trope, right?
Sure.
Okay. So they're kind of have this organized crime, union, labor, Teamster kind of a thing, vibe going is what I'm going for here. So that's where they control. What are some other generic locations we can do?
There's the downtown. Not the respectable uptown portion, but downtown. And I think that would make a good public feeding area because at least there's usually a lot of individuals hanging out there at all hours.
So generally you need to establish some kind of a rack. So there are feeding grounds where each clan has, and that's okay for them to feed there. If someone else feeds in those areas, it could be trouble. It could cost a favor. Drama, essentially, right? And the rack is just a general area where everyone in the city can feed. If you're not part of a clan, if your clan doesn't have feeding grounds or something happened, that's what they call the rack. So that's going to be the downtown area. So I'm thinking, as far as what's there, decent amount of homeless. What else?
Late night partiers.
Right. There's some like clubs and bars down there in that area that are always operating after late into the night.
Mm-hmm. You may, for some plot hook purposes, run into some undercover police officers in this area.
Right on. So police is something we didn't talk about, and just emergency services in general, right? So who is in control of the police? Who has sway over them?
I feel like maybe our Scourge does, and we just don't know it.
That's too easy, because then you're not going to be into play. Yeah, why don't we do with like the Tremere? That's kind of a weird one. The Tremere have sway over the police. They have influence over some high-level police officials and that kind of a thing. So when it comes to investigations, maybe that's part of the tension between the sheriff and the Tremere is that they're always able to get information easily because they're connected directly into the police.
Okay, I like that.
And that kind of intensifies their relationship. So if you look at what's happening here with a lot of these locations, I think we got a good framework here to work with. All these locations are tied to somebody or tied to a clan, and it draws into their power and what they're going to be able to use it for. And that just adds more connections and more pieces into our web to when one strand is pulled, it affects several other things. And this really kind of builds this world to make it more real, because that's kind of the way things work in reality, right? And
there's at least one more really big social aspect that isn't represented here yet.
What's that?
Bureaucracy.
Oh, yes.
Bureaucracy is huge. And when you have an age and upon age to manipulate the bureaucracy.
Cut the red tape. Right.
This is where you're talking about, building leases and property rights and things like that that can make a big difference later on down the road.
I'm going to make an executive decision and cut you off and say that's Toreador. Toreador has control of that. I have this envision of a female art gallery person that runs the art gallery. That's what I'm kind of envisioning here. But they're a person who knows how to shake hands and get deals done, right? And they know how to grease the palms to get what they need done at a city level, building permits, construction permits, demoing things. This house is condemned. Oh, that happened to be your haven. Oh, sorry about that. My bad. All these kind of things that can happen. Bureaucracy is incredibly powerful. And Toreador are one of the clans that have the most connection to mortals, because in being inspired in artwork and all this kind of stuff that they are drawn to, it keeps them in connection with the mortals. So I think that it's an easy one there to pull on the Toreador. Now, some of these aren't locations. They're just broad themes of things of influence, right? And that works just as well.
And maybe we do have some kind of ritzy art district or possibly a university district. And you can kind of lump in some of your art and scholarly learning into one category if you want to have a smaller city or you don't want to, add one extra thing to manage. And so you can kind of put that together.
Okay, so we have here between the 6 positions and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, looks like locations or themes of spheres of influence that we've written down. That's 12 different points, more or less, that we've put together. And they are all interconnected and controlled by someone, okay? So now this is our basis. Now our players will make their characters, and hopefully you should encourage them to take allies, contacts, and influence. And those are things that will tie them into this web. So if you have someone who makes a character, and maybe I make a Bruja, and I'm into street art, right? I'm a biker kind of a guy, but I'm into street art and graffiti and that kind of stuff. So that makes me connected to some of the more artsy stuff and that kind of thing, which draws me into what the Toreador have going on. And there's some complications there and some things that might happen, right? And this works for anything, no matter what influence they take. If we cover the broad categories, it draws them into this society and into this game and the complications that happen. Do you feel like this is a well enough laid out city here, or is there anything else that we need to touch on that we didn't besides locations and broad principles here?
The one thing that I think is lacking from our city is people. And when I went about creating my World of Darkness game, something that I did, mine was a historical game, but you can just as easily do this in a modern game as well. Research what is going on in that city right now or in the time period it's set. Look at some of the major human struggles. Look at the newspaper, look at those headlines, think about what caused that event, and throw a couple of those things into your game. Give your mortals something to play at.
Right.
And if it's something that would impact vampire society as well, then even better. So mine was like a Victorian age vampires, the system that I used, but I set it in New Orleans. With you guys. And it ended up being a Wraith game, but it was World of Darkness to start with. And something that was going on then was a terrible bout of yellow fever.
Right.
And there's also flood that happens in the Louisiana area. You have hurricanes are always a thing. What happens when that goes on? So whether it's weather, whether it's riots, whatever it is, give those mortals something to do as well.
Right. Right on. So it's an easy thing to do for inspiration for your first game is to look at, just Google whatever the local paper is and look through the headlines and see if there's anything that you can draw for inspiration. So maybe there is we'll just say that there's a large a large building that was scheduled for demo. I kind of combined those two words together to make Bildo.
There's a giant, large Bilbo statue.
So there's a building that's going to be destroyed, right? And why? Why is it happening? So perhaps maybe it's a large source of feeding grounds for one of the clans. Maybe there's some ritual that happened there with the Tremere that it needs to be destroyed so it can't happen again. Pick something that happened in the city and tie it to the vampires as to the reason why it happened, okay? Then set your players. Maybe that's the first thing that they need to do. They're primogen, someone that they want to get. I want to get in good with someone. Well, you know what? I don't know you. Go figure this out for me and prove yourself. Once you come back to me with something useful, then maybe I'll trust you. Maybe we can make some kind of a business agreement together and we can scratch each other's back. But first, you got to prove yourself to me. So go figure out what the cause of this is or why this is happening. And they're off. And then all the decisions that they make and the toes that they step on, or maybe they don't step on, or someone thinks they stepped on their toes, all sets things into motion. And that's where the fun of World of Darkness comes, in that the unintended consequences of my actions come back around to haunt me, right? And that ties back into that theme of nothing is free. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I know this seems
very dense.
Like a lot.
It's very,
and
yeah.
it is a lot. But if you get a solid foundation set out the gate, you're going to be more prepared to run your game, and it's going to be less struggle along the way.
Right. It will be smoother and more seamless.
Make sure you take a lot of notes about what your players are doing and who that impacts. And I would take a note from Kurt on this when he talks about thinking about what would happen if your players don't do anything.
Right.
So what is going on in the background, regardless of what your people are doing? And when they do impact something, what are the ripples that happen on account of that? Yeah, just take good notes.
Right. So there's a couple things to mention here. Once you have this thing built, make sure you have all these powerful NPCs in this world that have all kinds of influence and more power than your players probably will ever have, right? But make sure, no matter what happens, that the game is about the players and the decisions that they make. They don't need to be playing in the backdrop as the background characters to the Ventrue Prince's game. They are the focus of the game. If the movie was made, it would be about them and their struggles and what they do, right?
Right.
And that is the main thing to never lose sight of, because while there are all these important, influential, and powerful people in the vampire world that you can use to come in and swoop in and take care of everything, that's not what they're there for.
Well,
the game is about the players.
An important aspect of the World of Darkness vampire masquerade setting is they kind of tell you when you read through the book that elders are gloriously unconcerned with what is going on with neonates. They've been around for hundreds of thousands of years. They do not care what this person that's been around for 50 years is doing. It's basically like the adult world and teenagers. Sorry, teenagers, but we don't really care what you're doing most of the time, as long as it doesn't get to the point where it's impacting us in society at large. You can get away with your small shenanigans. You can try and manipulate things in the background, but you're only really going to get in trouble once you start going really way too far.
The other thing is that elders don't think on the same timeline that neonates do. Elders think in years and decades, and neonates think in terms of months and years, much the way that people do, because they're not so experienced and used to being a vampire. They haven't lost their humanity. And that's something else that we haven't touched on yet to make sure that I think is a big piece of vampire, is that they are not people anymore. They are now vampires. And to make sure that you try and emphasize what it is that they left behind in becoming a vampire. And that's part of that horror part of things, right? And that darkness.
The easiest way to test this out the gate, until you get used to pushing that button, is to use the courage. So something terrifying or fire is always a good one for vampires to try and push them over the edge and then give them the irreparable consequences of what happens once they're done being pushed over the edge.
Self-control is another easy one to use of the virtues, in that anytime that they are insulted, and not just like some side comment, but actually really insulted, and you can tell. If you see your players getting frustrated, that's the cue right there. And you can have them make a self-control roll and then watch the fallout from them losing their temper and possibly frenzying, right? All right, right on. So now I think we could spend another 4 hours talking about this and probably still not be done. But I think this is a pretty solid foundation, and hopefully this will help you guys to run a vampire game. But also, the same things that we have done here are applicable to any kind of political game you want to make. Whether you just build if it's on a space station, and we have who's in charge of the space station at the different levels and positions that they have. The whole premise of this entire thing is the exact same. You just change the titles and change the locations. Does that seem fair to say?
Yeah. I think the very last tip that I probably have for anybody that wants to run this game is the NPCs that you make for this are going to be more important than a lot of the NPCs you make for a dungeon crawl game.
Right.
So for me, what helps is to actually not just give them names, but find a picture for them.
Yes.
Print it out, write their name on it, write a couple of just short adjectives about who they are, what kind of person they are. And then, like I said, if there's someone important enough to warrant a goal, write that goal on there. And that is kind of your aid. Because to me, that picture and that name and those aspects of the personality help make them a real person for me. And they're easier to remember that way. And it's easier to remember their motivations and what they're after in order to incorporate them into the player's game.
Give them traits and quirks as well. So perhaps our Ventru prince, whenever he talks, he's very prim and proper, and he enunciates every last syllable of every word he says, right? But maybe when we have our Malkavian, maybe he talks quietly and he stammers and doesn't speak clearly and mumbles to himself. Give them quirks so that when you're interacting with your players, they feel like that they're talking to different people, and it makes it more real. It makes them realize that the way I deal with the prince is not the same way that I deal with the sheriff. Is that fair to say? Now, you don't have to go through all kinds of acting, but just change the pacing of the way you talk, change the tone, the volume, however you want to do it, and it will work wonders. And the more you do this, the more comfortable you become with it, and the better of a storyteller you will be.
And please, completely unrelated to running this game specifically, make your NPCs diverse. Okay? Males and females.
Yeah.
We would like a broad spectrum of colors, please, not just, nobody wants a monochromatic game,
One of my favorite...
Diversity. These used to be people.
Yeah.
So every variety of person there is their vampire counterpart out there.
Exactly. One of my favorite things to do is play against people's expectations a little bit.
So if you expect our Ventru prince to be a male, let's make our Ventru prince a female.
Right. I like to take Bruja and make them small, petite females, because I think it's fun to play against the trope of someone thinking that it's some small, diminutive, helpless woman, essentially, because she's teeny tiny and 100 pounds soaking wet, when in reality she's got potence and fortitude, or potence and celerity coming out her ears, and it's faster than a tornado and stronger than a bull. It's fun to play against those things, and it adds diversity and depth to your game. And the first time that Bruja checks one of your players that thinks that they are some kind of BA dude, or whatever, and they punch her card, it's not going to go well. And I guarantee that will be a story and something that they will remember. And it makes those interactions that happen after that more fun, more meaningful, I guess. Does that make sense? I think I've said that like 6 times this episode. I say that a lot. But
does that make sense? Yeah.
Well, sometimes I think things in my head.
If it doesn't, I'll stop you and make you clarify.
Sometimes I think things in my head and they don't quite come out the exact same way.
I do it fairly frequently.
So, yeah. There's a problem with thinking things and not saying them, and then also doing the opposite. So, alrighty. I think that'll do it for this one. There might be a part 2 to this. I don't know. Depends on your guys' kind of response. So if you have any specific questions about World of Darkness, feel free to drop us a line on Twitter or in the comments below and let us know. I love World of Darkness, specifically Vampire. Been running it a long time, both tabletop and LARP. Lots of experience with it. And I think it's one of my favorite games to play in and run. And it's limitless like every game is, but in a better way in my mind because of the darkness and drawing on the real world. You can play on those previous knowledge and expectations and that kind of stuff. So right on.
Using the meta against the players.
Exactly. To reference another episode. I like it. So anything else?
No, I don't think so.
Right on. So get out there, play some World of Darkness, try out some Vampire, broaden your horizons, get out of your comfort zone. And so as always, you guys can support us by following us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix, or If you like us, head over to iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever it is that you find our podcast, and give us a rating and comment on there.
Or YouTube.
And yeah, we're on YouTube now, so you can comment and rate us on there as well. And as always, the best way to share us, or the best way to support us, is to share us with people that don't know about us. So if you know people that are gamers or potential gamers, and you think that they might enjoy us, share us with them so that we can boost our signal out there a little bit more. And as always, we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetent.com. You can find us at justonemorefix.com and follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.